had a client recently, deeply interested in investing, very on top of their numbers, and they were describing a strategy that they had been working towards for years. As they were talking, I realized that they were essentially describing FIRE, financial independence, retire early. I asked if they had heard of the term, and they weren't aware of it. And he's not the only one. I actually have a lot of financial services clients, and I have been very surprised at the fact that this is not a term that is used in financial services. So what I want to do with this episode is bridge that gap to give some of you who've not heard of this term a really clear, grounded introduction. And for those of you who are familiar with the term, I want to give a bit more nuance and a bit more of a critical way of thinking about it. I'm Maya Goodker, economist turned executive coach, and for the last 15 years, I have helped now thousands of brilliant leaders reduce the amount of overwork and get clear on what really lights them up. At its core, it's very simple. You build a set of assets large enough that the income generated from those assets can cover your living expenses. So paid work becomes optional. Now, that's the financial independence part. The retire early bit is the timing bit. Right? The idea is that you reach that before you reach normal retirement age. Now, what FIRE isn't, even though sometimes I see it presented in this way, it's not an investment strategy. It's a way of thinking about your income, expenses, assets, and freedom. And one of the levers it focuses on is your savings rate. So the gap between what you earn and what you spend, that's your margin. And the more aggressively you want to save, the more quickly you are able to move towards your FIRE number. Now, everybody has their own FIRE number. In FIRE circles, they talk about your number. It's shorthand for how big does your investment pot need to be for work to become optional. One commonly used guideline is the 4% rule. Very roughly, if you can sustainably withdraw 4% of your portfolio each year, and that amount can fund your lifestyle, then you have achieved FIRE. That means you need roughly 25 times your annual living expenses. So if your annual living expenses are 50K, then the rough pot is 1.25 million. So people can use more conservative assumptions, 3% or 3.5%, especially if they want a longer runway or they want more resilience. Your lifestyle costs determine the size of that freedom pot that you're aiming for. So to get very high saving rates, people sometimes adopt extreme frugality, especially early on in their journey. And that does make sense because the more you can save early, the more that can then compound and do the work for you. But of course, this attracts strong opinions. Now, there are different types of FIRE. So you can maybe figure out what one is appealing to you. There's lean FIRE, which is very low expenses and a smaller pot and a very minimalistic way of life. Fat FIRE is a larger pot to support a more comfortable or luxurious lifestyle. Coast FIRE, and there are entire communities focusing on this one, and I do think this one is interesting, is some aggressive saving early, then knowing that your pot alone will do the work for you of compounding while you continue to work to cover expenses. So you are no longer working to build your pot up and do savings. You are just working to cover your expenses, and your pot is already doing the work of compounding. And I do think there is another really important concept, which is this idea that at a certain point in your compounding journey, that compounding is going to outstrip the contributions that you make. That's a tipping point when your money starts to really work hard for you. And so you can calculate what that number is. So let's say you had an ISA and you were contributing 20K, which is the ISA limit, into your ISA pot every year. Once you've accumulated a certain size of pot, the rate of return that you will get on that pot will be larger in absolute terms than the 20K. And so now the work that you're putting in to your pot every year is outstripped by what that pot is able to generate in terms of that compound rate of return. So that's a really cool tipping point, because then time and money are doing more of the work on your behalf. So there's also Barista FIRE, which is scaling down to part-time or lower pressure work that covers your costs and benefits whilst investments continue to grow. And what I think is interesting is that a lot of the professionals I work with are somewhere already in this landscape, even if they've not used these labels. They're building assets, they're reducing dependency on one single income stream, and they're increasing their optionality. They're just not calling it FIRE or fat FIRE or coast FIRE. And I think this is where FIRE becomes most interesting, because underneath it all, FIRE is asking that question of, what is your relationship with your work? If your belief is that work is something that you need to escape, minimize, endure until you hit that FIRE number and are free to do what you really want to do, then FIRE can feel like a solution. But most of my clients, including the ones who are close to the typical retirement age, they don't want to stop working. They're all going to carry on using their brains, using their strengths to do things that interest and excite them. What they may want actually, though, is more autonomy, more choice, and therefore more control of how and when they work. So yes, FIRE is useful. Even if you don't plan to retire early, it sharpens your thinking about freedom, independence, and trade-offs. But actually, what if we put more energy into attaining more autonomy, more choice, more control over how and when we work? What if we put some energy into that now, so we don't put off our future and think that that's only something attainable once we've attained a particular number and that outcome? And I'm referring here to a discussion that I heard two of my favorite podcasters having about FIRE. And they are writers, and one of them's a doctor and also a podcaster and, very successful creator. And they were talking about how a lot of the people that end up achieving FIRE and then sharing about it make a career of then writing, podcasting, coaching, building portfolio careers after they've attained FIRE, which is why we hear about them, right? We know about who they are. And so actually, that FIRE is just funding a career transition that could have been designed more gradually anyway. So for example, in my Vision Builder program, or what's now called Vision Code, that's exactly what we do. We take very successful people in their current careers who are doing well, who are just wanting to design those next steps so that when the moment comes, they're so ready to take a more autonomous leap, right? Just through tiny steps and a really, really long runway. So yes, they may also be saving and building those assets, but actually you kind of need to design the career part as well. Ramit Sethi also points out that extreme frugality can, of course, crowd out living well now. And so while saving matters, it sort of assumes that we have a very predictable life and that we are going to be in perfect health and that we can put off some of our dreams until the future. I think the final bit that's really important here is that to achieve FIRE, you're likely to have been pretty smart and disciplined and good about how you went about achieving that early, right? Because you managed to do it early. So when you reach that number, what are you going to do? People often feel flat when they reach that number. You kind of need a sense of purpose, contribution, and direction. And the idea that you will just figure that out once that milestone is hit, I think is very dangerous. And I have actually seen that be a recipe for depression. Because when all that energy goes into attaining that, doing things that perhaps you don't care about or don't like just for that reason, you attain that goal and then you realize actually that none of those things that really do light us up, like purpose, contribution, direction, autonomy, are going to be easy to attain. And then we have to start climbing that mountain. So to bring all of these different ideas and critiques together, this is how I would view FIRE. It's a great framework. It helps you think much more clearly about what your savings rate is, what your lifestyle costs are, and what your relationship is with work. I personally want to be in the kind of work that I never want to retire from. They say if you find the work that you really want to do, you never need to work a day in your life. That's what I'm here to encourage and coach people around and move them towards. I do value freedom. It's a fundamental human need. So I think wherever we can also create that in our current setup, without having to blow everything up. When we've been successful in our careers, that's often the leverage that we have and that people don't necessarily put on. So a lot of the clients that I work with haven't fully explored some of the flexible working options that are now available to them. And once we do start going down that route, they realize they've got a lot more leverage than they think to do that because they're highly valued inside the organization. So whether you are fully on your FIRE path or this is the first time you've heard about it, I would love to know, and reach out to me if you think, actually, I've been focusing on the financial part, but I hadn't really focused on the work part. That's what my Vision Unblocked and my Vision Code program are for. I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has given you a range of understanding around the concept of FIRE. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode. If you found it helpful, please do share it with somebody that you think will benefit. Those personal shares really matter. And if you're listening on Apple and you've ever sent me a note or wanted to send me a note to say that you're enjoying the podcast, there's something really quick and easy you can do on the Apple podcast. If you press go to show, scroll down to the bottom and give me a review, all you need to do is click the stars and it really helps the show to grow. So I look forward to connecting with you next time. Bye-bye.